Oh, good morning. Welcome. Today we've got Juby Kalliyattu, and I know I've said that wrong, but you're here with us today to talk about dispute resolution knowledge in legislation, particularly focusing in on the Victorian context. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Joanne.
I'm sure you've prepared what you're wanting to say, but perhaps give us a little bit of background about you and where you...
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you a background about where I'm from initially and also my background working as well.
Yeah.
So I migrated to Australia in 2016. I'm originally from south of India. My name is Juby Kalliyattu. So name doesn't really have a meaning, but my surname does originate from south of India. And I'm a proud Australian and with strong Indian values. I see myself as a Black Australian. And regarding work, I've been working for banking, dispute resolution in banking, then for a small period in consumer affairs, and now I work for mental health and being commission. All this time I've been working at dispute resolution at various roles. And one of the key interests on this particular topic, when I thought about what topic should I present myself, I thought about legislation because even though I have been mediating or have done that course in mediation. But once I started working in dispute resolution in the government sector, I realized that legislation does play a major role in everyone's life. It's starting with Australian consumer law, but more because that's where you deal with most retailers every day. And disputes may occur based on what we expect and what was advertised. So that's just a basic, I would say, a basic concept of law in our
Mm,
day-to-day life.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's the reason I came up with that idea of that topic itself, which is dispute resolution
Yeah.
and knowledge
No,
in legislation. Yeah,
that's great because yeah, you're right. In basic mediation training, there isn't time to really go into the context much. The focus is just on the skills and the process. So it's I think it'll be very useful for people to hear a little bit more about that.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So what did you want to share with us?
I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners. So I would like to begin my acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to past, elders past and present. Sorry. And the other thing I want to discuss is about to go further into these legislations, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So the Australian consumer law. So Australian consumer law is a federal law, and it's easy to access that law. So if you go into big legislations and if you can search for it, you can easily download it. And if you are on a dispute and if you are mediating or advocating for someone, it's easy to navigate through that legislation and point out things about what happens when you purchase a product or you're paying for a service
Mm.
and what possible disputes can occur. So it's a simple way of looking at it is remember Qantas got into huge trouble because of false advertising. And the main legislation which came in came to show was Section 29 of Australian Consumer Law, false or misleading representations. So
Mm.
things like that and that basic understanding of legislation can help us understand and navigate through that mediation process, especially if you are a mediator
Mm.
and if you are advocating for someone who just purchased a product or a service, and if the other party is a large organization, for example, a multi-million organization like Qantas, you may have to pinpoint the legislation where they have potentially breached and try to resolve disputes based on that. Okay, here is the breach, and this is a potential penalty you may be getting because of that breach. So try to bring them into that mediation and then resolve it for all parties involved. And the other legislation which I like to talk about is Domestic Building Contracts Act 1995. So in Victoria, in recent times, there's been a huge impact on housing industry, especially a lot of builders going bust because of the environment we are in at the moment. And this particular act, Domestic Building Contracts Act 1995, did came into spotlight, I would say, because of a lot of builders not able to complete what they have started, and the fact that also that even after completion, they were not able to comply to the contracts they have signed with the homeowners. A basic understanding of this legislation will help you navigate through that dispute resolution as well. One of the key section of Domestic Building Contracts Act 1995 is Section 8, and it's to do with, it's in a nutshell, what it says is a builder has a responsibility for 10 years on the day they have completed the build, provide maintenance work. And most homeowners are not aware. And when they start that conversation, sometimes the builders may try to shoo them away. But if you have that, even the basic understanding, and there are a lot of information available online as well regarding Section 8. And you may be able to bypass that stage of initial, I would say, like a cold shower. So you just need to bypass that. And here is the legislation. It pretty much empowers you when you have that basic understanding of legislation. Yeah, that's here is where I like to stop and listen to you, Joanne. Yeah, you're on mute there.
I had to sneeze. Yeah. Okay. So that's really interesting because a lot of people don't realize that. I guess you've got the challenges of what happens to people where the businesses have gone broke, the builders.
That's right.
Those
Yeah,
people just left in limbo.
that's where the insurance comes into place, because it's a requirement that all builders needs to take insurance, and the insurance will cover them for 7 years. Yeah. So at different stages of the build as well. So it's legislated as well.
Some assistance. So from the point of view of mediators that are working in that context, having an understanding helps with inviting the builder that are still there to the mediation and getting them to engage in the process.
Absolutely. And there are other Victorian government entities like DBDRV, Domestic Building Dispute Resolution Victoria.
Yeah.
They do intake, which is free of cost for building disputes. Yeah.
Yeah. And so for mediators that would like to perhaps get employment with organisations like that or be contractors on their panels, doing a little bit of pre-work on understanding the legislation would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's taken for granted that they're going to provide, so anyone who's going to work for, let's say, any of the Victorian dispute resolution branches like DBDRV or Dispute Settlement Centre, they'll be given
training,
clear training on these specific legislations. But it's for the builder as well to be aware of what they are getting into, and or the other side of the, let's say, whoever is selling that product or service, to be aware of their responsibility as well. Yeah. Mediators can throw that light of, okay, they do have that responsibility, and there is expected, like, this is what's expected of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I often say to mediators is don't be generic. It's fine in theory we can mediate any type of dispute, but it's very helpful if we have understanding of the context. So
because the interesting part is when you start, or when you go introduced to mediation through that mediation training and all, we have that expectation is, yes, we can mediate anything, any issues. But when you think about the reality, yes, you can mediate any issues, but you need to have that basic understanding of what you're trying to mediate here. Because the other party may be an organization, and the organization tried to stick with their terms and conditions or whatever the legislation the market is complying with, then they may not deviate from, because that's for a mediator, we always expect they should come to a resolution in such a manner that it should be win for all parties.
Yes.
Yeah. But large organizations, especially really broad for them, they have clear-cut terms and conditions, and these terms and conditions may be evolved from a legislation.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it may not be easy for them to make that jump out of it to resolve one single dispute because they be scared to create a precedence.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So as a mediator, if you get the chance to get a basic understanding of that legislation, it could be useful. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's my understanding anyway, but I'm open for your ideas, John.
Yeah, the thing is, it's not really safe to make the assumption that organisations are going to perfectly comply with the law. Your example right at the start about Qantas it's one of our largest companies, and they got it very wrong
Yeah,
in what they thought. And I think I could say without risk that a lot of the smaller companies, probably people are quite unaware of some of their obligations.
yeah, yeah, especially small scale businesses or single tradies who
Yeah,
we normally contact every day for normal.
absolutely. So, yeah, for them, they think, oh, I've written my terms and conditions, so that's it.
Yeah,
That's the rules. But if they're
yeah,
in conflict with the legislation,
yeah,
ultimately the legislation would win.
yeah,
I we know that mediation is generally a faster and lower cost way to resolve disputes. For those that are thinking about, there's a conflict, an issue that's arisen in some of these areas that you're talking about, consumer disputes or building disputes. What are your thoughts about for people that might be listening that aren't mediators that are involved in a concern with an organisation?
yeah. Can you give me an example so that makes it easy?
Or say if someone's listening who's got a dispute with a trader, and the trader said, no, too bad, your problem.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. If you don't want to go further deep into the legislation, but if you just need to find out what exact part of that legislation applies to that situation, the best way to do is to speak to Consumer Affairs. Give them a quick call, let them know this is a situation. They will clearly explain, okay, this is a potential breach of this is a legislation where it can be a potential breach. And once you get that understanding, here is that breach, then you send something in writing to that trader and let the trader know this is the timeline of events and this is where the issue occurred. And that issue can be of a potential breach of Australian consumer law.
Yeah.
And this is a section, and this is what we believe is the breach. And this is what the potential penalty will be if this matter goes to a court. But we don't want to go there. And we like to come to a solution. And this is what the solution we are after. And this is the reason why I came up with this solution, because we think it's fair and reasonable, but open for him or her to come back to us and negotiate.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a good start. But
yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. And for people that feel that might be a little bit overwhelming or challenging, perhaps English isn't their first language or things like that, coming to a mediator who can help sort through.
yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes through the emotion of they've done the wrong thing to, okay, what exactly? What's the timeline, as you said? What do you think the actual harm is? What is the remedy that you're wanting?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's always good to bear in mind that when you have a dispute, instead of firing it up to resolve it, because what I have seen so far is it's easy to get into a dispute, but
Yes.
it's really hard to get out of it because by the time you get out of it, you'll ruin everyone's relationship.
Mm.
And as we all know, mediation works well when you have a clear intent to maintain that relationship.
Yeah.
And so have that thought always behind that process, I would say. Yeah, to bring everyone into that table
Yeah.
and sit for that negotiation. The other end of it is if the mediation doesn't work, we can always go to court. And that's when that's the reality of the court system at the moment, is the long wait time. And that could be quite expensive depending on what kind of case and what's the solution sought as well. It could be maybe a couple of $100, or it could go for maybe $500, $600 if you lodge a case at VCAT.
Yeah.
But again, the wait time will be 2 years, up to 2 years, depending on the issue. And this applies to Motor Cars Traders as well. So Motor Cars Traders Act 1985, when you buy a new car, old car from a trader.
Yeah.
And if you go into that dispute, because I come across a lot of disputes in that area, it's easy to say, okay, I have all these rights. This is a legislation. I need all these requirements. I need all these boxes to be ticked. But what if the traders say, oh, I've done everything I can, and I have to make sure that I have followed the legislation. But if that matter goes to a court like VCAT, you're looking at a minimum of 2 years. But think about, you have a car which needs to be returned, and now it's a 2-year wait time.
Yeah.
And the same for dispute resolution in building as well. Some of these repairs needs immediate attention.
Yeah.
But if you fall into that dispute with the builder, and DBDRV could take time from DBDRV to VCAT. So you cannot file a case at VCAT for building straight. You need to go through DBDRV.
Yeah. Yeah. The building dispute settlement.
It's a pathway. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And mediation is a pathway for most of the types of disputes. So you've worked in a few different areas. Do you want to share a little bit more about the different sort of areas that you've worked in mediation?
I wouldn't say I'm a mediator working on those organizations, but I was pretty much involved in the dispute resolution area.
Yeah.
These organizations, because they're so large, huge, in the sense that they deal with volume, they pretty much cut the mediation process into tiny bits.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think I have worked at some areas somewhere at different organizations. Yeah. So I don't want to call myself as a mediator. Yeah. Yeah. So I worked at banking, customer advocacy of one of the regional banks.
Yeah.
And that's where I used to receive complaints before that complaint goes to AFCA, which is the Financial Ombudsman.
Yeah.
So as per the legislation, every bank needs to have a customer advocacy team. And the role of that team is to resolve disputes within 5 business days.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's RG 271. So regulation 271, which clearly says if I raise a written or an oral complaint with a bank's customer advocacy needs to resolve that dispute within 5 business days. If they cannot resolve it, they need to provide a written response saying, this is the issue, this is a solution we are proposing. If you're not happy with it, you can speak to AFCA. So that was my role for 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
Resolving disputes in banking customers, mostly could be mortgage related matters, could be a stage where they were about to get into that mortgage, but the owner or the consumer, whoever is taking that loan, may have experienced delays. And that delays could cause financial detriment to them because of the other contract they may have signed already. So these are disputes. The bank needs to find out who's responsible. Was there a broker involved?
Yeah.
What part did bank played for that delay? And if it is, are we ready to compensate them? And each complaint we receive is a way of understanding, okay, there is an issue with our process itself. So the organizations can correct them as well. And also, end of the day, these are your clients. You may have to deal with them for the next 30 years because these mortgages are for 30 years. But nowadays, no one stick with 30 years. But
absolutely. But you don't, as an organisation, that's a really good point to raise, that disputes and complaints are an opportunity to look at processes and look for improvement opportunities. Rather than getting upset with the person who's making the complaint.
Yeah. And so that's that used to be my
Banking.
role at banking. Then I moved to consumer affairs for a short time. So I was doing a very basic role of answering calls and emails. Pretty much, I like to say I was empowering the community.
Yeah.
So I never worked at residential tenancy,
Mm.
but that's one of the main areas where we used to deal with. But I wasn't aware of that. I was not trained on that legislation.
Yeah.
So residential tenancy is where consumers could call if you're renting. So let's say if I'm renting
Mm.
and if I have come across some issues with my rental area or against my landlord, if landlord is trying to evict me or
Yeah.
sending letters saying that my rent is going to increase, consumer affairs can help you understand, okay, this is the legislation. Are they breaching it? If they are, they asking you to pay or asking you to increase it, but like they're letting you know that they are increasing rent more than once in a year.
Mm.
There could be breaches here. Anyway, I'm not trained on that legislation, so I don't
No.
want to go there. But because I know that a lot of people does call in that area, I thought I just say this here. But I was trained in consumer law, Australian consumer law, which is a federal law. So it doesn't matter which jurisdiction you are, which state you are,
Mm.
that law remains the same.
Yeah.
And that's where your day-to-day interaction with the market is, I would say. Any product you purchase, any service you pay for, whoever is providing you that service or product has a responsibility under the Australian consumer law.
Yeah.
So any issues with advertising not meeting that expectation, quality, anything at all, that law is there to protect you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually got a very good website, the Australian Consumer Law,
Yeah,
with guides and examples and all sorts of resources.
yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And even the legislation, even though if you haven't come across a legislation in the past, but legislation is maybe hundreds of pages, but it only takes an hour if you go past that stage
mm,
of just staring at it and just trying to navigate it
yeah.
using, let's say, Control F. And if you
Mm,
download a Word document and you Control F and try to put in keywords like,
yeah.
let's say, not fit for purpose or whatever.
Mm,
So you easily realize, yes, you can easily pinpoint on these potential breaches. You can go
mm,
there and have a look. So I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but it is possible. Yeah.
yeah.
So once you get that skill on one legislation, you can find out that it's pretty much the same on any other legislation as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very good advice because, yeah, sometimes people can just stop before they start because and with legislation, there's usually some preambles and some generic sort of information at the beginning, and I think, oh my goodness, but yeah, once they find which clauses are the ones that are really relevant,
Yeah.
the language is usually quite understandable, I
It
find.
is, yeah. Because what I realized is that Motor Cars Traders Act 1985. It's really old, that act.
Mm,
And we always think, oh, that's a bit tricky because the way they have the wording on that act can be confusing or anything. But
yeah.
there are a lot of other supplementary articles which you can find online, which will help us understand more about the specifics of those
Yeah.
acts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, there's lots of guides and guidance, although we've always got to be very careful when we're finding information online to make sure that it's coming from a reputable source. Because
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, all states, any jurisdiction,
yeah,
they all have these bodies like Consumer Affairs or Fair Trading
yeah,
who may be able to provide a lot more
absolutely.
information.
And
Yeah.
and their job, they've got a whole lot of people that's job is to try and help the community to understand the rules that the traders or the car sales people and others need to abide by.
Yeah, that's the empower. So that's why I always use the word empower. Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
absolutely. So that's excellent. And then, so you had some roles where you're working in dispute resolution. What made you decide to become a mediator?
yeah. So I started off as in TIO, telecommunications ombudsman, where I was answering calls just to provide that basic dispute resolution. But I wasn't even know that that was dispute resolution.
Yeah.
That was my initial step in to mediate alternative dispute resolution. And I wanted to find out myself if there is any course I can do in a short span of time so that I can sharpen my skills. And I started to search for a lot of certifications, and I couldn't find anything. And then I came across this being a mediator. And that's when I thought, here it is. This is what I wanted to do. And it really helped me.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. And since then, have you been working in a mediation role?
It's not clear from what the train. So I always try to compare it with our training.
Yeah.
Am I doing that kind of mediation? And the answer is no. But is there some elements to it? Yes, a lot of elements from what we have trained so far. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of those roles are more into the conciliation. So it's much more focused in on what does the legislation say, what are the rules, and there's all sorts of schemes. So which one are you working with at the moment?
So Mental Health and Being Commission.
Yeah.
So that's under the Mental Health and Being Act
Yeah.
2022.
And what sort of issues, what sort of work comes through?
Yeah, so it's mostly consumers or their carers, or even social workers or non-legal advocates raising complaints in relation to the treatment they're getting from a public hospital.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So it's mainly public hospitals. Is it only public hospitals?
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
We can only deal with public funded mental health services.
Okay. Excellent. Yeah, okay. I can imagine you have some very interesting cases coming through that, and clearly confidentiality and all of those considerations. So it sounds like, so it's issues to do with people's physical treatment and also issues around mental health, or is it really just predominantly mental health?
If the core needs to be to do with mental health, but if there is any physical issues being reported during that treatment, that does fall under jurisdiction.
Yeah.
But anyway, there is other entity called Health Complaints Commissioner who can look at complaints which are outside the mental health.
So if they amputate the wrong leg or something, they'll go there.
Any other issues to do with medical, even the private medical practices, they can call the Health Complaints Commissioner.
Yeah. No, excellent. And again, when you got the job there would have been training about the jurisdiction and.
Yeah, absolutely. And the core focus is, of course, to do with that, bringing that standard care to the Victorians.
Yeah.
But during that process, every complaint does allow us to understand more about the process of the hospitals. I'm sure the Commission do a lot more than complaint resolution. There be a lot of background work they do where they try to improve that standards. So I only involved in these disputes. And that's why I said I'm not sure what extent I could say that I'm a mediator, because I will only involve in a proper mediation or a conciliation session maybe once in 50 cases, because most of the time issues get resolved in that first instance itself.
Yeah. Yes, it's more complaint handling. And
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Are things sent to investigation as well, or?
Yeah, for us, investigation is a strong word. We don't. Very few handpicked cases go there, but most often complaints get resolved in that first stage itself, where we just send an email. The hospital can resolve it straight with the consumer.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, and I guess the encouragement for people that are listening, for general community, if you feel that something's not right, there's always going to be a group of people like you, Juby, that are working with these organisations that they can approach and say, this is what happened to me, I don't think it's right. And you
Yeah, not me, but the organization.
no, not you. Don't just call everyone up and ask for Juby. But there's people that are in a role that can help.
Absolutely, yeah. These organizations, even if the matter doesn't fall under their jurisdiction, they have plethora. So let's say consumer affairs, they have heaps of referrals they can make, recommendations they can say to you. You'd be surprised the amount of information they have, because they've been I would say they've been operating since 1980s, so they have a clear understanding of what's working and what other organizations are there. So feel free to, I would say, just call them and find out if they can help. If not, where should they call?
Yeah, absolutely. And for people who are trained as mediators, I think you had some thoughts about a career in the public service.
Yeah, so it's so natural that you find your employer, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it comes from that mentality of how you want to, what kind of work you want to do. And if that's disputes, are you ready to take on those disputes? Yes. I remember working for the bank, one of the area managers, when they took my call and said, I'm not sure how you work on this. Like, how can you listen to people's dispute every day? And that was one instance when I thought about it. That's what I'm doing. I'm listening to people's dispute every day. And I never thought about that. It's not really, I don't mind. Like, I'm happy with that. It's always that curiosity each time you listen to that call or pick that email.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is something happening for that person. What can we do? Yeah.
Yeah, no, and that's really the empathy that we bring to that process, rather than worrying about maybe how they've expressed their concerns, because sometimes people need to build themselves up to make that complaint and they can come across quite angry at the beginning. So having the empathy to understand that they're upset because they think something not right has happened for them, and if you can remain calm, as I'm sure you do, they'll often calm down quite quickly as well.
Yeah. And the reality is what we got trained during our mediation training. The reality is it's better to resolve things from the start itself instead of blaring it and taking to a court. Because it's easy to hold on to a stand and bring it to a situation where it's really hard for us to go back.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you mentioned that earlier, that the relationship it builds and the relationship's destroyed. There's no going back. Whereas if things can be resolved earlier, then there might be a way to continue.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the mediators does a great job.
Yeah.
It's like let's say if you have a mild fever or a cold, you don't have to go to a GP. You can just walk into a chemist, get a Panadol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So really start with the least intrusive and expensive way of dealing with the situation. And we may be the chemist rather than the pill. But and like a chemist, sometimes you go in and say, I've got this, what can I get? And we might say, okay, you're going to need to take this elsewhere or escalate it in a certain way. So you've talked a lot about being in that role of almost triaging, of helping people to understand, which is fabulous. And look, before we close off, are there any final points or messages you wanted to get through?
Oh, I can't think of any. I'm glad that I can. I'm not sure how extent I helped, or if this is what you expected.
No, look, I do think it's very helpful. For me, some of the insights that I got out is for mediators, definitely take the time to read through the legislation, visit the websites that support the legislation and understand the context for the people that are having difficulties, and whether it's in building or whatever other context that it particularly attracts us to work in. But also there's been a really powerful message for consumers, for the general public, to there are options. It's not just a matter of complaining to your friends about whatever hard done by thing that you think. You might be able to also look at the legislation or go to the websites where there's lots of resources and information available. And also look for people that are looking for employment, that are attracted to dispute resolution. The public service has a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely.
3 really very clear messages that came through. And Rebecca, thank you so much. She came in very late into the meeting, and she's really identifying in the chat how patient you sound. I know if I was calling up and wanting help, I'd be definitely wanting. Can I speak to Juby, please? I'm sorry, Juby. I'm just going to. Oh, you sound like a saint. Wow, that's high praise. Rebecca, did you want to maybe say anything before we close off? Was there anything about the topic that you were particularly wanting to know, and we could quickly recap?
No, I was curious about all the opportunities, and I only caught the tail end of those with the mental health, that was at the Wellbeing Commission,
Yeah.
which did pique my interest. But I'm really glad that he also said what the reality of it would be like, and that's something for me to really think about. Do I want to dive into that type of more complaints handling side of things, or stick to mediation like proper as I've been trained, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
But I'd really appreciate, actually, I can connect to what he said about it's the curiosity that helps him continue to listen to people's complaints or negativity, because I understand that that's a type of finding out truth of what's actually really going on. But I guess there's that aspect of there's that journalistic detective type thing about it that would always be very interesting about those kinds of jobs. But yeah, I just have to think about whether that might be the right fit for me.
Yeah.
But I am so impressed. As you can see, I'm very, I guess, when I look at how Juby's presenting himself, I go, wow, he is absolutely the perfect fit for that. Because yeah, I don't think I present the same way.
We can always aspire.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's been very helpful to understand that, as you said, the majority of the things are dealt with quite quickly in a much more,
especially in public service, because of the volume.
Yeah.
The process itself is designed in a way to cater to that whole community.
Yeah.
And of course, budget cuts and all. So they focus on the process.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much for your time and being available so early. We will put this out. I actually think it would be quite useful on our podcast as well. So if that's okay with you, I'd like to put out an audio version so that people can listen as they're driving along and thinking about where they might like to work, or that issue that's been niggling away at them that they think I should do something about. So I think you've encouraged people to at least find out what your rights are and whether there are opportunities for redress or resolution, whatever would be appropriate. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Joanne.